Before we get stuck in, I just want to give a quick thank you shout out to my Mutt tier Patreons. We have Glad Goku, Dare Denny, Kale Bennett, That Jordo, Kenkei of Warheads, Super Hyper Mecha SP Mark II, Cyrus the Skeptic, and new year, new pair of underpants. That's right, I change them yearly. Thank you. Hi, what's up? I'm Channel Pup, the mascot for the level-headed fanboy, and today we're going to be talking about the characterization of Sonic the Hedgehog, how it's evolved over the years, how we as fans and analysts have responded to change, and what makes Sonic fundamentally Sonic. This may even go on to become a series where I discuss the characterization of other Sonic characters over the years, or just other characters in general. I guess we'll see how this one does. Of course, though, it all begins with the Blue Boy himself. Now, before we begin, I do just want to say that there's a ton of Sonic content on this channel, and there will surely be more to come in the future as well. So, if you love Sonic, be sure to hit subscribe for more Sonic. You won't be disappointed. As well as that, if you do like my channel already, now is the best time to check out the Patreon link in the description below, because January is kicking my ass this month. Ad revenue is notoriously low this time of year. It is out of any YouTuber's control. But if you can help, it would be hugely appreciated. For one-off payments, there's also a link to the Ko-Fi. Or Coffee, I've never said that out loud before, so I don't know what's correct. But any support is hugely appreciated, and it does come with perks. Also, one more thing before we get stuck in, because I know that this could probably be confusing. I use the term Japanese Sonic as basically anything Sega Sonic, effectively. Media that is made in Japan, and while I might be referring to English dubs here, I'm still calling it the Japanese Sonic because they just treat the character differently from Sega of Japan. Whereas Western or USA media refers to any media produced in the West, basically. So if it is Japanese but still dubbed in English, it will just be considered Japanese Sonic media. I hope that makes sense. So it is funny to me how protective us Sonic fans get over a franchise that over the course of its 30-year tenure has never really sat still or reached a point of a status quo since the end of the 16-bit era, despite clear efforts to do so. The history of Sonic's characterization is vast and varied, with different takes on this character, but all of which can be traced back to the sensibilities of two different cultures. What we're about to witness is effectively a game of ping pong between the Eastern and Western world, and Sonic is the ball. Yes, there have been countless different iterations of Sonic, be it Boom or the movies or the main games, but fundamentally at their very core, there's really only two. Observe. So Sonic, as we know, it started out in the 1990s, and while this video isn't going to necessarily be a deep dive into how this character came to be as far as the real world goes, we do naturally need to touch on the overall intent behind him. Let's take a quick look at the gaming mascots of the 1980s, with the first example being Pac-Man. Now, don't let me understate the importance of Pac-Man, but as far as characterization and design goes, Pac-Man was made to service the functionality of the game he was in. He's a little chomping boy running around a maze, chomping on dots, and maybe eating some ghost ass if he's been lucky enough to eat the big dot. Pac-Man's name derives from the Japanese term paku paku, which means to eat. And as for Pac-Man's appearance, well, he's a mouth. Pac-Man is a playable mouth. Now, over the years, he's of course changed things up a bit, got some fancy shoes, but for now, let's just stick with that visual. Our first gaming mascot is literally a mouth. Konami had Frogger. Don't say it with the hard R though. And gameplay revolved around taking little timed leaps to make your way across an obstacle-laden stage. And with that, there's the Froggy Boy himself. And again, don't let me undersell the importance of Frogger, but let's face it, they weren't exactly shooting for the stars with this character. He's a frog, and he doesn't want to die. And that's where this character really just starts and ends. The 1980s had a few other characters who would go on to become a bit more narratively rich in later installments, but the one to beat was Nintendo's Mario, who took the world by storm. Super Mario Bros. Was revolutionary in that he was a much more versatile character to play as. You'd go on a journey with Mario. He could run, sprint, jump, fight. Versatility was the name of the game, and because of that, Mario was very much the face of gaming. A character created purely to serve the medium he was made for in the most versatile way possible. A design that translated nicely to pixel graphics, but would also look good on box art. Mario didn't really showcase much of a personality beyond he's happy to be there and he's a good dude, which allowed players to kind of project themselves onto him, but also take into account the dude had a discernible face in gameplay, which is more than can be said for the mouth and the frog. This naturally rooted Mario in pop culture. So one may ask, how do you really challenge that? Well, first and foremost, Sonic was made to be a mascot for Sega in direct response to Nintendo's Mario and the firm grip that Nintendo had on the gaming industry thanks to Mario. Sonic is a proposal. How about if the character we play as has a personality that influences the experience? Sonic isn't someone you can project yourself onto. He's irreplaceable and ever-present. Look at Mario. He's approachable and friendly, he's inviting you to come on the adventure with him. Now look at Sonic. He dares you to keep up with him. And making this all work is the fact that Sonic wasn't just made to be a clump of pixels that we play as. He wasn't a video game character in the conventional sense. He's just a character in general, one that transcends the video game medium. He's not just a mouth, or a frog, or an Italian. Please don't get offended, it is just the truth. You all look like this, Italians. In a medium entirely dependent on audience interaction, Sonic did something revolutionary, in that Sonic matters more than you do. You may be the player, but he's in charge. To the extent that when you boot up the game, he's got an arrogant little smirk on his face as he wags his finger at you, though he's egging you on. You can't play this. You're useless. You're nothing. And he's Sonic the fucking Hedgehog. Don't leave him hanging. He'll get pissy. You suck dick at this game. And you've got a second chance. But Sonic is going to make it abundantly clear with his body language that he's tired of you prancing around. Get it done. You're not jumping into this fella's head. He's telling you to pick up that controller and play him. Make him your little toy. Breed him like the little 16-bit slut he is. Then, once you've beaten the game, look at that friendly smile. He's pointing at you. The credits are about to roll, but he's starting off by giving you credit. Good job. You've impressed Sonic. But he's also got values too. He's not too fond of Dr. Robotnik coming in and industrializing the natural environments and turning animals into his badnik henchmen. And he's gonna do something about it. He's gonna get violent. Don't mess with Sonic the Hedgehog or he'll burn your house down with you in it. Well, that's all surface level stuff. But it all comes from a desire for Sonic to be all the things that Mario wasn't. A character that, divorced from the games he's in, is just cool. See, wanting to create a mascot that's marketable, lucrative, and can topple Mario is as strategic as it is creative. So the aim of the game was for Sonic to be trendy. Think Mickey Mouse's college dropout cousin who wears cool sneakers and thinks cops are lame. This is like Mickey Mouse, a character who transcends pop culture. If Mickey Mouse got the stick out of his ass and drank a Pepsi. Mickey Mouse, but awesome. He's also a cute little critter, as opposed to like a human dude in his 30s or something. So naturally that appeals. But prior to the release of Sonic 1 in 1991, Naoto Oshima's moon-bounce brain was working overtime constructing all kinds of ways to assert Sonic as just an awesome fella. Sonic has a curvaceous human girlfriend called Madonna, no doubt inspired by Jessica Rabbit. Short King and Tall GF, that's the dream. Any takers? Sonic fucks. Sonic was also in a band, but much of this ended up scrapped because, well, where do you fiddle this in a 16-bit game? Not only that, but the design philosophy behind the Sonic video game was all about keeping the player active and moving, so it would be a bad idea to bog the experience down with text lore and splash screens. Instead, they kept things simple, with Sonic's character nuances communicated by his animations, and a simple, self-contained story communicated entirely through the game's levels, mechanics, and boss fights. And if it wasn't clear enough, idiot, you could always fall back on the manual. But did you know that Sonic has an origin story? In fact, he has several, but one of them is a little closer to being canon to the games than others. Starting off with the Sonic story Gaiden, written by Naoto Ohshima, which can be found in Sonic the Hedgehog Story Comic Volume 3, which serves as an origin story for Sonic the Hedgehog. And it goes like this. In 1974, a fighter pilot called Henry Gordon was the first man to break the sound barrier, and because of his sharp techniques, he was nicknamed Hedgehog by the other pilots. Because of his nickname, he had a blue hedgehog embroidered onto the back of his pilot jacket. Nice to know he's a good sport, seems like a cool dude. But then he died! The plane went boom, and so his best friend Chuck decided to wear his jacket as tribute and would connect with Henry's daughter Meg, who worked as a photographer. Chuck gives Meg the jacket after dubbing the hedgehog on the back Sonic, so Meg is taking photos of an aviation event when one of the planes crashes into the press booth. They really ought to stop flying planes in this universe, it's just a bad idea, damn. And in the Inferno, Meg envisions the blue hedgehog Sonic coming to her aid. She blacks out and awakens in hospital, believing she was saved by none other than Sonic the Hedgehog. So, that's a cool story, I'm not gonna lie. As an origin for Sonic, yeah, it doesn't match up with what the series has gone on to be, however there are references to this story in the games themselves. Take into account the title screen of Sonic 1 and 2. It's iconic. The hoop with the wings? Well, that's a piece of aviation imagery right there. These are pilot wings. The title screen has Sonic literally jumping out of a pilot wing badge. Then in Sonic 2, it would be established that Sonic does own a biplane, even if the plane is more commonly associated with Tails. So the closest thing we have to a canon origin story for Sonic is that he's a spiritual reincarnation of a fighter pilot. I really don't actually hate that. Planes are cool, this would be a cool movie. Allegedly, a large part of the reason why Sonic's originally planned cinematic debut, Sonic and the Wonders of the World, didn't go ahead was because the producers and Sega couldn't see eye to eye on Sonic's origins, with Sega really wanting to push this pilot angle. Now, before we talk about Western Sonic, USA Sonic, there's one more Eastern Sonic depiction from the 90s to talk about. There was also a Sonic the Hedgehog manga in 1992 from Shogakukan, commissioned by Sega. Now, the reason this is noteworthy is because it does introduce an entirely new layer to Sonic. So the fighter pilot stuff isn't present here. Sonic is instead the superhero alter ego of Nicky the Hedgehog, a student at Hedgehog Elementary School in Hedgehog Town. Man, they really got imaginative with these names, didn't they? And the dichotomy between Nicky and Sonic isn't too dissimilar to the dichotomy between Peter Parker and Spider-Man. Nicky is a mild-mannered kid. He gets bullied and has low self-esteem. He's also got really bad eyesight, so he has to wear glasses. He wants to be a hero, but he's not much of a fighter. What he doesn't realize is that he is Sonic the Hedgehog. So yeah, unlike Spider-Man, this is really more of a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde kind of deal. Then the blurb states that this transformation is actually his older self from the future stepping in to help out when he needs it. The only person who knows of Nicky's secret is Tails. I mean, hey, a great way to accentuate a character being cool and trendy is to establish that they're not always cool and trendy. And given that Sonic is a superpowered character with a color scheme not dissimilar to Superman, I can see why Shogakukan would have taken the character in this direction. There are, of course, also usually some exceptions to the rule. While Japanese incarnations of Sonic typically reject the advances of Amy Rose, well, straight up, in the manga, she is Nicky the Hedgehog's girlfriend. Sonic doesn't even realize. But they are, of course, one and the same. It's clear that as far as Japanese media was concerned, Sonic was meant to be enigmatic and mysterious, like an urban legend, utterly untamable. While Sega of America had their own ideas for how they could tweak Sonic to appeal better to the Western demographic. Starting with the obvious, there is a distinct difference in how Sonic is illustrated in Western media to how he's illustrated in Japanese media. He's a little more rotund because he's been drinking a load of your weird dark orange Fanta, and his quills are depicted as more of a mohawk, servicing his punk-esque rebellious persona. At Sega of America, there was an internal document. The Sonic Bible. Now, before you go starting to think that this is getting to their heads, the term Bible here refers to a production Bible. These aren't uncommon, so no, Sega weren't trying to pretend Sonic was Jesus Christ. We've got a few decades yet before IDW enters the fray. In this production Bible was an origin story for Sonic, but this one doesn't involve fighter pilots or Jekyll and Hyde-esque transformations. In this version, Sonic's birth name is Sonny, and he lives in a hedge behind a burger restaurant in Nebraska with his poverty-stricken hedgehog family. You know what? I thought the fighter pilot story would be perfect for America, but this is even better. Sonny's dad was a runner, but he died, and Sonny wants to be just like him. Anyway, Sonny's a little prankster. He likes to curl up and disguise himself as a bowling ball pricking the fingers of bowlers. What a prick. And it goes on and on and on. There's just a lot of world building here until hibernation season arrives and Sonny decides he doesn't want to hibernate. Instead, he stumbles upon the lab of Dr. Ovi Kintobar, a kindly scientist trying to reverse the effects of mankind's pollution by taking all of the evils of the world and forging them into the Chaos Emeralds. Then he'd use the Grey Emerald to neutralize the chaos, undoing the effects of the pollution. I don't know, he's a man with a plan. Anyway, one day Sonny is running on a treadmill and completely overclocks it, going so fast that his fur turns into a blue mohawk, and so Kintobar dubs him Sonic. Kintobar would also undergo a transformation when radiation in his lab, combined with the emeralds and a half-eaten egg, transformed him into Dr. Robotnik, now driven by the insane desire to turn animals into robots, and so Sonic and Robotnik become enemies. Now, of course, this story was refined and adapted into other media forms of Western Sonic, most notably the Sonic the Hedgehog promotional comic in 1991, albeit with a few small changes. We don't see any of Sonny and his poverty-stricken family living in a hedge outside a burger restaurant in Nebraska, nor do we touch on Sonic's dead athlete father. We also establish Sonic's planet, which would carry through most of the westernized Sonic media, Planet Mobius. This same origin story for Sonic would then make it over to the UK's Sonic the Comic from Fleetway. So Western Sonic media went a little further toward presenting more of Sonic's impatience in their depictions of his origins. The more westernized Sonic was less of an enigma, more a local celebrity in a world inhabited by other talking critters. He's more of a sassy motor mouth with a heart of gold a la Bugs Bunny than Japan's more legendary take. And I can understand why this was done, especially given the popularity of Bart Simpson in the late 80s through early 90s. And so this would carry over to all other Western Sonic media, as our chili dog chomping, wisecracking teenage rebel would burst into the world of TV entertainment with two unique shows. The Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog, which presented a wacky world close to the video games that Dr. Robotnik wants to conquer and constantly strikes out thanks to Sonic and his trusty power tails, before the episode ends off with a little lesson for the kiddos presented by Sonic himself, meaning that while he may be a rebel, he also seeks to be a good influence for the kiddos at home. Then there's the simply titled Sonic the Hedgehog, better known as SatAM, in which Robotnik already rules over Mobius with an iron fist and an army of SWAT bots, and Sonic and a band of freedom fighters, including love interest Princess Sally Acorn, seek to take Mobius back from the forces of evil, with Sonic playing a smaller role in a larger cast, working generally as the freedom fighter's ace in the hole, while Sally is more the straight-laced strategist, making Sonic and Sally a somewhat mismatched, yet all the more endearing couple because of it. And there we have another departure from the more Japanese incarnations of Sonic. While Madonna was a concept in the early development of Sonic 1, since then Japanese Sonic have been kind of depicted as utterly untamable, too rebellious for love, rejecting the advances of young Amy Rose in Sonic CD. While Sonic and Sally share a budding romance in SatAM, and Sonic is depicted as quite a lusty hedgehog in Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog, particularly in Quest for the Chaos Emeralds, where his pursuit of beach babes is constantly interrupted by a mission in time and space. But before we shed the classic era, there are a few other depictions of Sonic to discuss. We mentioned Fleetway earlier. Well, Fleetway has its own unique characterization for Sonic. So USA Sonic was a sassy wisecracking motor mouth, but let's not forget, Fleetway Sonic was a British comic. And what's the British equivalent to American wit? Absolutely relentless savagery. Sonic's quips in UK Sonic media are enough to annihilate that soft little USA Sonic's will to live. Also, he looks like a Christmas tree. USA Sonic was very affectionate towards Tails, a loving older brother figure. UK Sonic? positively vicious. And let me be real when I say, this is absolutely what it is like to be friends with a British person. We are all like this, especially me. Then there's Sonic Underground, which is a pseudo-successor to Sonic SatAM made partially in France, but still primarily developed by Dick Entertainment, like the previous two Sonic tunes. He keeps USA Sonic's Mohawk design and is still voiced by Jaleel White. However, this guy has a different story to tell and different characterization to boot. This time Sonic is the son of Queen Lena. Eaten up by a longing for his family, he finds his triplet siblings, Manic and Sonia. Combine all their names and you get Sonic Mania, so make of that what you will. However, Sonic's rebelliousness is dialed up a little with him now being depicted as a bit of a thief. Except it's not Sonic who I'm talking about here. That's Manic. Sonic in this show is the responsible one. He's a bit more serious. He's the one trying to keep Manic in line. Sonia is also there. Anyway, you get the idea. In the 90s, there were two main Sonics. Japanese Sonic, the mysterious and untamable wild child out to crush all who endanger his world, and the chili dog chomping champion of Mobius, local celebrity Sonic the Hedgehog. And then there are of course the offshoots of that with the mangas and the UK depictions, but these are the two core versions, and depending on where you grew up, what your sensibilities are, and I guess your age, one of these will be the blueprint for how you view Sonic. So the 90s draw to a close and gaming is looking pretty different to how it looked at the start of the decade. Sonic was about what was trendy in the 90s, and with the 2000s on the horizon, the trends were changing. And what's about to happen is very interesting, as both versions of Sonic will undergo a significant change, but you'll also start to see the two converge. Enter Sonic Adventure, the first fully voiced narrative-driven 3D Sonic game. Demands were changing and Sonic was expected to change too, but when you have a fully voiced storyline, it's naturally open to less interpretation. When playing through the classics, Sonic never really talks, and his backstory isn't really relevant. So Sonic can kinda be either the USA version or Japanese version. This could be Planet Earth, or it could be Planet Mobius. This could be Dr. Robotnik, or it could be Dr. Eggman. Sonic could be the spiritual reincarnation of a fighter pilot, or he could be a brown hedgehog turned blue in a lab, because the story is communicated in a way that doesn't explicitly say otherwise. But with a 3D rendered fully voiced story, the expectations are naturally different, and Sonic has always been a little more cinematic than most of his platformer contemporaries. So naturally, we started to see ideas merge and coexist. Dr. Robotnik was now referred to as Dr. Eggman in Western media too, with it being suggested that Eggman is just a nickname, while the name Robotnik was swiftly phased out. The name of the world where the story takes place was never really mentioned, although it is pretty obviously meant to be Earth, especially in Sonic Adventure 2, where the adventure takes place predominantly in San Francisco. With that being said, Sonic himself, aside from a redesign, didn't really change much, if at all, presenting us with a kind of mix of the USA and Japanese versions of Sonic. Like the Japanese depictions, he's not really treated by the story as any kind of celebrity, aside from a few pinball machines in the Casinopolis stage. He's a guy who comes and goes, passes through and acts on what he believes. An unwavering, righteous will to protect Station Square from Dr. Eggman and Chaos, the god of destruction. He'll go to the ends of the unspecified planet and stop at nothing to protect it. Also, like in the Japanese depictions post-Sonic 1, Sonic is at no stage depicted as romantically inclined, portrayed as a little icked out by Amy's romantic pursuit of him. However, more in line with USA versions, Sonic is a sassy little rascal who'd love nothing more than to just relax on the beach. But with this, we also saw the infamous shift in focus to a larger cast, with each character getting their time in the spotlight. But there's a reason for this. There were clear efforts to maintain Sonic's more mysterious, enigmatic side, but the story of a guy we barely truly know much about, who is unwaveringly confident in his views, knows he can save the day, and as expected saves the day, isn't a very interesting story. So other characters get focused too. Sonic is indeed at the heart of Sonic Adventure, but for the fast-paced moving guy he is, he's pretty static. He doesn't have any major weaknesses or setback that he needs to overcome. He knows what he needs to do and he's gonna do it. His one weakness being his inability to swim isn't really something that he needs to overcome. It's just something he accepts about himself and moves on with. The real meat of the story for Sonic Adventure is Tails, Amy, and Gamma. These are the ones who have their arcs. Tails overcoming his dependency on Sonic, Amy learning to value herself above her silly crush, and Gamma on his revenge quest to defy his own existence. This carries over to Sonic Adventure 2, where Shadow is really at the heart of the story. This brings us over to Sonic X, a piece of Japanese supplementary media to the games, even going so far as to adapt the storylines of Sonic Adventure 1 and 2. I think current sensibilities and trends cast a more flattering light on Sonic X now, as I recall being alienated by Sonic X as a kid, by the fact that Sonic isn't actually in it very much. It's a show more focused on the whole cast, with Chris Thorndike at the very center, serving as an audience surrogate for the kiddos. Thus, Chris's characterization is wafer thin because you can effectively just project yourself onto him. The show focuses a lot more on these different Sonic characters exploring the human world, coexisting with a culture that isn't their own. Bizarrely though, this show, like other USA Sonic media, also explicitly states that Sonic and friends hail from another world, and are now trapped on planet Earth. The planet they come from is never actually named. But there is a piece of Sonic media that I've not mentioned until now. One born of the USA that would draw a great deal from the Sonic cartoons of the 1990s. And while the Sonic cartoons of the 90s had ended by the time Sonic Adventure rolled around, the Archie comics would continue, giving USA Sonic a new lease on life. Fleetway Sonic did the same, however both comics needed to change in order to line up with the video games. And so there were reasons given for the redesigns of the characters, and things got very interesting with Dr. Robotnik in Archie, but I'm not here to talk about that. That's a game apologist thing. Fleetway eventually fizzled out, but the Archie Sonic comics continued. And what we had in the end was a unique evolution of the SatAM Sonic mashed up with the extended cast of the video games. The Freedom Fighters were still present, but matured up, along with Sonic himself. And as for Sonic, well, there are some key differences between him and his Japanese counterpart. This Sonic had different romantic interests, including Princess Sally Acorn, pop star Mina the Mongoose, and villainess Fiona Fox. There were even spin-off series taking place in the future where Sonic was King of Mobius, married with kids. Seriously, what is it with Western Sonic media and royalty? But naturally, with a comic series running as long as Archie Sonic, Sonic's static character status was occasionally broken to give him his own arcs and his own lessons to learn. Most notably in the Sonic vs. Tails story, where the Prowers start a revolution against the Acorn monarchy, and Sonic's obliviousness towards Tails reaches a boiling point. Unlike other Sonic media, Archie Sonic was a bit less restrained. We could have Sonic change. Sonic could love, he could cry. All things you wouldn't really see from the Japanese Sonic. Not without exceptions, of course, as when Sonic says goodbye to Chris Thorndike, tears are seen coming from his eyes. Over time, the Japanese Sonic started to change too. Look at Sonic 06, for example. Sonic is a lot more stoic, less a little rascal, more a legendary protector of Soliana. However, there are a few little glimmers of Western Sonic here. While it's never really suggested that Sonic loves her, Sonic does showcase a little more warmth and affection towards Princess Elise than we typically see him express to human characters aside from Chris Thorndike. Even to the point of falling to his knees and breaking down when he thinks Princess Elise is dead. But I won't lie, Sonic's characterization is wafer thin in Sonic 06, so it's no surprise that he only takes up a third of that game. But from here, Sega have a dilemma. Obviously, Sonic 06 wasn't received very well. I don't need to tell you that, you already know it. It's a game with such an overblown reputation that you'd think it was developed by Hitler. But it was a wake-up call for Sega, and so they started to clean up house when it came to Sonic. And one of the orders of business was to respond to fan demand of reducing the cast. This was partly down to conflicting playstyles interfering with the flow of the game, or these characters being required to reach the final story, even though they play pretty much the same. The main problem was with them as a gameplay component, however there was also a growing sentiment that they were becoming annoying. And so, Sonic Unleashed was quite a pivotal game. The playable cast was reduced to just 2 versions of Sonic, and the supporting cast was reduced to just Tails, Amy, and Dr. Eggman, with Tails and Amy getting reduced roles. So Sonic has a much greater presence in this story. At the heart of it is his friendship with Chip. However, we did start to see Sonic become little less of a static character. Sonic's cockiness was back after being mostly absent from Sonic 06, however it serves as a catalyst for the story. Dr. Eggman only splits the Earth into pieces because Sonic let his guard down and ran his mouth. He underestimated his opponent. From that point on, Sonic takes Eggman much more seriously, growing so sick of him to the point that he literally chucks him out of his Egg Dragoon. That's another point too. Transforming Sonic into a werehog allows us to see another side to Sonic, while supporting the idea that Sonic's spirit is undefeatable. He is infected by Dark Gaia, that causes a transformation, and for most people, it turns him into hopeless, depressive wrecks and monsters. But not Sonic. Sonic is just a bit more gruff and moody, but he does have a moment of sad introspection when Amy doesn't recognize him as the werehog, suggesting potentially a little more affection towards Amy. Well, Unleashed does something quite smart. There are a lot of optional multiple choice interactions in the game's hub worlds that don't really bear any consequence on the story, but you can decide what kind of Sonic is. You can agree to go on a date with Amy, or you can stick with the more traditional Sonic who has no time for matters of the heart. But we also see one fairly major piece of USA lore work its way in. Sonic loves chili dogs. And sure, why not? Why shouldn't he? It's nice to know what Sonic's favorite food is. Sonic in Unleashed is presented as a cocky guy who underestimates his opponent and pays the price. But even when the world is ending, he'll make time for someone in need, no matter how big or small their problem is. And with Chip, we really see the brotherly dynamic Sonic once had with Tails come back into play. So moving on over, we've got Sonic and the Black Knight, which is commonly heralded as a game that showcases the best of Sonic's characterization. And while it isn't my favorite depiction of Sonic, he is pretty rad in this game. He's got a sassy back and forth with Caliburn. We see him stop in his tracks to help out people with smaller issues in the grand scheme of things, that he's quick to forgive his past opponents and just takes everything in his stride. He values life over all else, and also understands the importance of accepting that it isn't forever. If you like a more stoic Sonic, this is that done right. But okay, here's where it gets awkward. So around the 2010s, Sega decided to respond to the criticism that Sonic stories took themselves too seriously, which ushered in what I'm referring to as the Pontac era. This is because all localized Sonic scripts were penned by the duo of Ken Pontac and Warren Graff at this time, cartoon writers most famously known for Happy Tree Friends. These were the writers tasked with simplifying Sonic, making the franchise more approachable to non-Sonic fans, more kid-friendly, and it is worth noting that because of this, these two did receive significant backlash, but they were hired to enact the changes that Sega wanted, and their work was continually revised by Sega higher-ups. Warren Graff has gone on record saying that a lot of the decisions made with the writing of the franchise during their era weren't their own. So I'm just calling it the Pontac era as that's just the easiest time delineator. So with the Pontac era, we saw Sonic become all the more westernized, as we're back to Sonic being a sassy motormouth, but now it's been dialed up significantly. The dialogue in these stories serves one purpose: assert Sonic as cocky, witty, and righteous, prioritizing comedy and wisecracks above all else, with one interesting outlier. Enter Sonic Lost World, the one storyline where Pontac and Graff would have any kind of influence over the actual story. In Sonic Lost World, like in Unleashed, Sonic's weakness is that he lets his guard down and underestimates the situation, leading to the Deadly Six gaining the upper hand. Sonic, wanting to take responsibility for this, enlists the help of Dr. Eggman, while Tails is personally offended that Sonic calls upon Eggman's help when he himself is a genius and would be more than enough for the task at hand. We also get rare glimpses of Sonic in moments of conflict with Tails and instances of desperation. Sonic experiences guilt and loneliness in this game, and I must admit, on paper, I actually like that idea. I think Sonic making a mistake is a good chance to explore a more sensitive side to the character. Unfortunately, it's the execution where this one falls apart, as again, it's riddled with jokes that over-explain themselves, Sonic enlisting Eggman's help only happens because Eggman persuaded him, and Tails' jealousy seemingly comes out of nowhere, etc, etc. But I do like what they set out to do with this one, even if the execution lets it down. Then in 2014, something very interesting happened. USA Sonic returned with a vengeance, but in a new form. The Archie comics were still going steady, although they'd been pretty neutered by Sega's mandates, seeking to clean things up a bit. But a USA version of Sonic was back on TV, with Sonic Boom, an alternate continuity with unique depictions of Sonic and his world. This iteration focused more on the team dynamic of Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, Amy, and newcomer Styx the Badger, all with redesigns. But we're just focusing on Sonic and his characterization for today. So with Sonic Boom, Sonic presents himself as a witty, too-cool-for-school hero, and like most Western depictions, he's more of a local celebrity than mysterious urban legend. A key difference here, though, is that behind the rebellious facade, Sonic is a dork. He's lazy, occasionally condescending, hot-headed, and immature, which complements the more comedic tone of the show. This Sonic is a bit of a slacker. He'd much rather be eating at Meh Burger with his friends than go fight Eggman, but he does get into it when he does. This Sonic is one that can fold under pressure, snap at his friends, and will occasionally just serve his own wants over battling Eggman, but he's by no means a bad guy or unlikable. Beneath his flaws, he's still got a heart of gold and looks out for the people of his village and his friends. He always pulls through. Of course, Sonic Boom was short-lived, lasting 2 seasons and 3 games, and around the time Boom ended, so did Archie Sonic, with the license going to IDW Comics, who operate a lot more under the thumb of Sega. Leading the charge with the IDW series was former Archie Sonic writer Ian Flynn. IDW would very much restore the more Japanese Sonic, if anything closest to Sonic's characterization in Sonic and the Black Knight. The mysterious, unwavering enigma with a lust for adventure who operates under his own values. He'll never kill or subject his enemies to any kind of punishment that takes away their freedom to choose a better life. As far as he's concerned, his enemies must be granted the freedom to choose their lives, but if they choose lives of destruction and oppression, Sonic will always be there to send them packing. He's that confident in his ability to do so, and he's that confident in his values that he's doing the right thing. We also see this get challenged to an interesting degree, particularly when it comes to characters like Surge and Kit, who feel Sonic's philosophy just perpetuates a cycle of violence. There are interesting philosophical conundrums explored in IDW Sonic, but I must admit, I feel like this version of Sonic being a guy who literally inspires everyone he meets, even his adversaries, can become just a bit too preachy and a bit too much of a Gary Stu, to the point where other great characters just get benched. This particular characterization for Sonic effectively carries over to the games now too, with Ian Flynn also writing for them. Sonic Frontiers being the earliest example of his work, where Sonic not only rescues Tails, Knuckles, and Amy from cyberspace, but also helps them on their own journeys of self-discovery, even inspiring a little righteousness in Sage, the daughter of Dr. Eggman. I'll definitely say this, I prefer this matured up Sonic to the more forced comedic Sonic of the era before. And I think it does work here and can make way for some good stories, even if it isn't my favorite. For now though, this is the current version of Sonic. Except you can't keep America down. Enter the Sonic the Hedgehog movie in 2020, produced by Paramount Pictures, which features Sonic coming from another planet, dubbed Mobius in the novelization of Sonic 2, raised by an owl for the first years of his life before being sent to Earth, where he spent years all by himself and is now riddled with crippling loneliness and depression until he meets Tom Wachowski, who takes him in and adopts him as his own son. His confidence comes from the ones he loves. His wit comes from his only interaction for years of his life being pop culture and movies. This is a Sonic who fears Dr. Robotnik. He'll never let Robotnik or any enemies harvest his innate powers. He knows what's at stake, and his whole arc is that he's an immature kid who wants to be a superhero. He's basically riddled with ADHD. Also, he makes no bones about straight up murdering Robotnik in the second film. Okay, well that's awesome. Also, Robotnik is referred to as Robotnik. And I think it's obvious why all of this has been done, beyond this just being a Western depiction of Sonic. Well, for one, the first Sonic movie... Look, I love this movie, but it is clear they had no confidence in Sonic as an IP. Like, really, really clear. Should have been clear from the first trailer. So aside from the post-credits, the only Sonic characters that appear in this movie are Sonic and Robotnik. If Sonic is to carry the movie by himself, the more Japanese incarnations of Sonic aren't really going to suffice. Again, there's a reason why Sonic games tend to be populated with other characters. However, it is also worth noting that this more fleshed out take on the character was just more likely to resonate with a more general audience. You're more inclined to root for someone when they don't know they're going to win the way Japanese Sonic always does. You don't need to root for Sonic as much in a video game, given that you're playing as him, you're already sharing in his victories. When it comes to a non-interactive media, again, a story about a guy who knows he's going to win and then just wins is boring. But that's not the only instance of USA Sonic's return, as we also have the American-produced Sonic Prime cartoon, where Sonic's impatience is the catalyst for the shatter of the universe, and he genuinely fears the possibility of his friends and home never being restored. We see him experience numerous moments of weakness in this one, and he has a redemption arc as he sets right a world ruined by his own mistakes. But again, I think beyond just the Western sensibilities, the reason this has been done is because Sonic is the only original Sonic character in the show for the majority of its run. Remember what I said about the stories of a stoic Sonic needing to fall back on the supporting cast? And that brings us up to date. We'll surely see our enigmatic emissary of the wind return in future Sonic games, while our less mysterious, more fleshed out Sonic will be making his return in Sonic 3 later this year. Obviously, the Japanese Sonic varies from game to game, as the USA Sonic also varies from project to project. 06 Sonic is not like Colors Sonic, and Boom Sonic is not like Movie Sonic, but there is an inherent philosophy at the very roots of each version. Japanese versions of Sonic are all about the mystique of the character, and the real story is about the people and world who coexist with Sonic. He is, to all intents and purposes, a static character. He informs the story rather than the other way around, but because of that, he's a little less endearing. Japanese Sonic can only be as good as the stories he's in. On the other hand, USA depictions of Sonic tend to humanize Sonic, be it him displaying weakness more openly or just showing more layers. Aspects like his too cool for school personality are rooted in context. There's a reason why he carries himself as he does. This comes at the expense of his mystique. USA Sonic is tamer and more accessible, which in turn does make him a little less unique. That being said, I think there's a middle ground. There have been rare occasions when Japanese Sonic has shown weakness. For example, the end of Sonic X. And it's all the more meaningful because you know that if Sonic is upset about something, it's going to be important. If Japanese Sonic isn't underestimating the stakes he's up against, it's a lot easier to take his word for it and be swept up in the stakes. My personal preference? USA Sonic all the way. Sensibilities have changed and trends have changed. While a dude who never compromises and never breaks may have been cool in the 1990s and 2000s, nowadays I think that's interpreted much more as a stubborn person who's repressing themselves. I don't by any means need or expect them to do this, but to me, I think if Sonic can confidently, openly be emotionally candid towards his friends, that's the coolest he can be. He doesn't have to be breaking down and sobbing, but if he were to express to his friends that what he's doing isn't easy, I think that would go a long way to maturing the character for a more mental health savvy age. I think it's part of why people responded so well to Movie Sonic, and it's also why he's my personal favorite version. He's the one who means the most to me because he's the one I can most root for. I have in the past said that I like him because he's a little more relatable, and I think people have taken the wrong thing from that, thinking that I'm just like, oh, I like him because he's like me. It's not so much relatable in a literal sense so much as I can kind of relate to the fact that what he's doing isn't easy, you know? I'm obviously not going to relate to, him going aboard the Death Egg and destroying the place, but I can at least relate to his fear in having to do so. When it boils down to it though, if you ask me, neither one of these Sonics is more valid or matters more than the other. Again, what you like is going to be more informed by your own sensibilities and maybe other variables such as age and culture. Yes, you could say that Japanese Sonic came first, so given that he's the original, he lays the most claim to the legacy, but with that logic, Batman should still kill people. Different creative people are going to leave their stamp on Sonic, as we see with countless other long-running fictional characters. It's all part of a character's life cycle. And personally, I'm just excited for whatever comes next. To me, what makes Sonic Sonic doesn't have to be the mystique of the character, nor does it have to be him, being like a local celebrity. Things like the origin stories and stuff are all very superficial aspects to me. I don't really care what planet he comes from. I just think Sonic needs to be someone who is confident in his ideals being pure, him being anti-oppression, him being kind, and him having a rebellious little sense of humor. If you could tick all those boxes, it's still Sonic to me. but I'm always welcoming to new layers and new takes on this character. So what do you guys think? Who's your favorite Sonic? Do you have a favorite Sonic? Do you prefer the Japanese influence? Do you prefer the American influence? Comment below, discuss, and as always, if you enjoyed this video and you want to support more like it, be sure to hit subscribe, hit the like button, and in the description below is the link to my Patreon page, where for as little as $1 a month, you can get your name in the credits as well as perks. I'm working on a Sonic fan short right now, and that's gonna have its own unique depiction of Sonic in it. So if you want to see any behind-the-scenes stuff, that's all on Patreon. And of course, a special shout-out goes to the patrons in the $5 or above tiers. And we got KLX, Richard Rogers, Glad Goku, Dare Denny, SSS06, Kale Bennett, That Jordo, Kenkei of Warheads, Dazzle Fizzle, Super Hyper Mecha SP Mark II, Cirrus the Skeptic, New Year, New Pair of Underpants, that's right, I change them yearly, and Vera Wild. Thank you folks so much for your generosity, and to all of you at home, thank you so much for watching, and have a great day. Get out of here.